Many artists struggle with foreshortening. It's one of the most requested topics from our students, so here's a full-length, step-by-step tutorial on how to draw a difficult foreshortened pose. I'll show you how to use my GSL method to draw the action, proportions, and forms before the line art so you can give any figure drawing structure and realism.
So let's start with our gesture. I kind of see her head going into her leg, right? So let's say a gesture line like this. So your gesture can be pretty messy. We can kind of start to put in the arms and the feet. So let's say I have the beginning of a gesture, but the issue is I have drawn her body a lot longer than it actually is, because when we start with a gesture, we have an idea of what a body looks like, and then we tend to make it very, very long. So now what I'd like us to do is actually draw in a box that we want her to fit in. So if this is the top of the box and her leg here is, say her leg here is the bottom, I'm gonna move it up a little bit. So I have the top of the box and I have the bottom of the box. And now I'm going to look at that and say, okay, where do I wanna put her hip line? If I had to divide it up, I can kind of see that her head is about 1/3 of the length of her body, right? Her head is huge because it's so close to us, right? So originally you can see, like, I put the shoulder line back here, but the head actually overlaps the shoulder line quite a bit. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna take this distance here, divide it into 3, and then we're gonna put her head in first. Let's draw in shape her head. When you put it in, you're gonna be like, whoa, this is really big and weird looking. But that's okay. So there's the head, and then she's got a tilt in her head. And then you can draw in the rest of her head here. Once I have that in, then I can use the head as a unit of measurement. So I'm going to say, okay, if I took that head and I put it down here, I would come across her hips. I'm going to draw a line for her hips. Make sure that you notate the angle of the hips. Kind of put that already in my gesture. So the hips are there. And then you can use this and divide that up again. Really what we're doing is we're putting her in a box that's foreshortened like that. So if you take this box that's in perspective and you divide it into half, you can see that if she is actually 7 heads high, right, here's another, her head would be really, really big. Like, you can kind of see how big it is overall in that box, right? So when you're drawing people foreshortened, make sure that you have this rectangular prism and the orientation of that prism in your head. Like, try to see it, try to visualize the shape that you're squeezing her into. Otherwise, your body's going to get extra long. So now I can kind of see that her body is very cylindrical. I can see that her, the top of her rib cage. I'm still in the gesture phase. Now I'm just kind of putting in her arm, resting it where I feel is her hip. And her feet look super tiny. Like, her legs look really, really small. But I can kind of see that this leg down here is roughly the size of her torso. And I think I made her torso too long. But always go back to your head, just so you keep your proportions in check. Okay, so I'm gonna find the middle of her torso and put in this leg here. Notice the negative shape between her legs. And I noticed that her chin should align with the middle of her chest. And right now my chin is shifted from that. So go ahead and check to see if your face is aligned properly with the torso. I didn't tilt it enough. So I want the middle to be here. Make sure I have the proper tilt of her head. Okay, so this is a lot more complex than my usual gestures, but I just wanted to make sure that I'm looking for all of the alignments. And because it's a really funny silhouette, I want to spend a little bit more time on it, and I also want to check to see that everything lines up. I'm checking for my negative space. The hips actually stick out just as far as the hair does on her, so you want to double check that those actually align.
If you'd like to support the channel and the creation of free arts education, become a member on Patreon for behind-the-scenes perks and online classes at Wing Canvas.
So now I'm going to move on to my shapes. So I'm going to start with the ball and shield. Notice that I'm actually making it smaller because the hair is actually larger than that ball. So I'm going to start off by drawing that big circle, then moving down to that center line and putting in that shield. Okay, I put the ear in there only because ears help define the orientation of the head. So the lower the head is tilting, the higher the ear goes. So if the face is tilting upwards, the ear is lower on the face, right? So once you, normally I would say ears are not important at all for portraits. They are important though for figure drawing and for structure drawing, because if you know where the ear is, then you know exactly the orientation of the head. Okay, so the rib cage is a little bit tricky because your rib cage, you know, should be, you can either draw it as an egg shape or you can draw it as a box. So if I'm drawing a rib cage from the front, you know, it would look something like this, right? If I'm drawing a rib cage on the side, if I'm drawing a rib cage foreshortened, right? Here's the top of the rib cage, here's the bottom of the rib cage. Kind of draw it like this. Just leave a space for where the neck comes out, and then the middle of that rib cage, draw an X from corner to corner, and you'll find the middle of the rib cage when it's foreshortened, when you're looking down at it. Okay, so let's look at where her rib cage is. I can kind of see her neck is in there. So if you look at her collarbone, right, you can see a little bit of her collarbone on the side there. That is the top of the rib cage. So your collarbone wraps around the top of your rib cage. You can actually find where her shoulder joint is, right there, right? And then you'll be able to draw the top of that rib cage. Let's draw the top. It comes out the other side, and then see where her belly is. So her belly is about there, right? Her belly button is probably a little bit higher, and then above her belly button is where her rib cage ends. So I'm gonna take a guess. I'm just gonna guess that her rib cage ends about there, and then I'm gonna draw in the roundness of the rib cage. This is really hard to wrap your head around sometimes, but I definitely wanted to draw a figure that's foreshortened and break it down into structures, into actual forms, so that it's easier to dissect on your own a little later. That's where the neck goes into that rib cage. So we all know that the rib cage has an opening, right? You don't really need to draw it here because her chest is overlapping that. You're not really gonna see it or need it, so you don't have to draw in that hole. Next, we're gonna draw in hips. So notice where her hand is, right? Her hand is resting on her hip, so it's about there. So I'd like you to put your fingers on your hips, those bones that stick out on the front of your body. They stick out on either side of your pelvis, right? So put your hands on those bones and notice where they are in relative to your torso. And she's conveniently got her hands on her hips. So if you can locate where her hands are, right, you can actually find the corner of that box. And you probably won't see the bottom of the box because we are looking down at her in so much perspective. You'll probably only see a tiny sliver of that box. So I have the rib cage, I have the hips. Now I'm going to sketch in my center line, and just want to make sure that it all works. I can kind of see now that I misplaced my leg, right? This leg is not aligned with that center line, so I'm gonna have to move it when I put in the leg. Okay, so I'm gonna start with this leg because I can see it comes right out of that center line. And remember, we're gonna draw it as a cylinder. So you want to put in this cylinder here, and then the one underneath it. You can use the bottom of her leg to help guide you. And then I'm gonna find the other side of the leg. So I have to move my gesture, and that's okay. The whole point of that gesture is to help guide you, but it's almost like this is your second attempt, right? Your gesture is your first attempt, and now you have a second chance to get it right. So her knees. This leg is a lot more foreshortened than the other one. Okay, so I want to double check my negative shape. So my negative space is the space between her legs. It's like a triangle, right? A bit of a triangle. So that counts as a shape. So that should definitely be in your shape phase. Draw in both your negative and your positive shapes. And you just want to double check that the feet are similar in size. So now that I'm looking at this leg, I feel like this leg is way too thick compared to this one. What did I do wrong? I think this cylinder here needs to be a little bit smaller. Okay, so I'm going to adjust this shape. All right, that looks better. I'm even going to draw in the top of that cylinder just for fun. Okay, so once you're happy with this, double check the alignments, like double check that everything checks out, and notice the counterbalance. Notice that her head is tilted this way, her torso is tilted this way, and her hips counterbalance it. It's a little bit hard to see, but her hips actually counterbalance her rib cage. Okay, so next I'm going to work on her arms. So let's draw in a shoulder. Just draw in a circle for the shoulder. The other one is hidden, kind of behind. And then from that, it's easier to find those cylinders when you actually look at where the where the arm is bending. So the arm is kind of bending about there. So I can draw this curve first and then connect those cylinders. Okay, and then the other one, draw the top of the cylinder and look at this negative space in here. Yes, I'm drawing in that negative space in there, and then using the bottom of that negative space is her wrist, and then finding that cylinder. Now I'm going to sketch in the shape of her hand, just kind of like a diamond shape. And on to her other arms. I'm going to do the exact same thing, except I think I want to put in her bangs as a shape because it comes out further than the head, and I don't want to get confused. Like, I don't want to confuse this line with her hairline. So I wanted to actually make her hair a separate shape. So her bangs kind of start in the middle here, along the middle line, and then they come out. All right. Now I can find that elbow because it's easier for me to judge the space once I have that hair in. There's the elbow. And I know you see a big curve in her arm. Leave it out. Leave it out in the structure part. Put that in the last part where you're really drawing in the lines. And just focus on forms here. I also forgot to draw in the negative space in here. So I'm going to start there first. I would get a much more accurate placement. I think the only thing that's missing now is the shelf of her chest. Okay, we have to think of it as a shelf because we're looking down at it. So if I look at this line here, which is the bottom of her hips, to her chin, right? I look at this distance. The bottom of her chest is kind of halfway between here and here, maybe a little bit lower than halfway, but I just want to guess and put a line there and just want to guess where it falls. Okay, so I think the last thing I'm going to do is just put in her nose and her mouth and her eyes because I think it's actually pretty important in this pose because she's looking up at us and it's very, her face is pretty important. So Not to get confused, I'm just going to lighten up the guidelines of her face. And then I'm going to put in her nose. When I draw faces, I will draw the nose and the ears before I do the eyes and the mouth. And that's because the nose and the ears will tell you what the face is doing before the eyes and the mouth can. So, you know, I like to work from big picture. It's a lot more obvious. I'm gonna put in her mouth underneath, and then her eyes are pretty close to her hairline. So you can kind of sketch in her eyes if you want. This is still in the shape phase. Now that you have the basic structure, and this is why structure is so important, is because if you can draw a figure like this, knowing the proportions, knowing how to break everything down, you can make up anything out of your head. That's the power of structure drawing. Because I can easily kind of outline her and draw her convincingly, but I wouldn't be able to recreate that with my own character, like with an OC, or as an animator, you know, I have to kind of wrap my head around how I actually want to draw every single part and how it can move independently.
Before we continue, if you want to level up your art skills, join Wing Canvas and start learning online with our creators. Get inspiring projects, professional guidance, and personal feedback on your artwork. Small group classes allow you to learn and interact live or on your own time from class recordings. If you're a new student at Wing Canvas, you can get 2 virtual classes for the price of 1. Go to wingcanvas.com to find out which class is best for you. Now back to our lesson.
Okay, so the last part is my line work. So I'm going to do this with blue. And now this is where you get to draw in all of the details that you didn't get to put in before. So I'm going to start with the straps of her tank top. So I wanted to start with the line of her tank top because this is not actually part of the structure. This interacts with the structure, right? The structure is, you know, your rib cage, your hips, your head, arms, legs, pelvis. I think I said that. Hips. And then clothing is independent of that. Clothing interacts with those forms and will take on the properties of what it's interacting with, right? So that's why I didn't draw the clothing as part of my gesture, shape, and line. I kind of left it to be done on its own. Okay, so drawing that in. And then a little bit with the clothing and the hips here. Just finding the complete thing that I'm drawing. So I want to finish this tank top all the way through. Okay. And now I think I really want to draw this shoulder because right now it's separated. My forms don't have any muscles connecting them, and that's kind of bugging me. So I'm going to go and start to draw in the contours of that arm. You know, and as much detail as you can put in, like this little bit of flesh that's like right in between the arm and the armpit, right? That's nice to capture because it looks very real. There's little extra bumps. And you'll probably be surprised at how closely your lines actually follow your structure drawing. So I also noticed she's got 2 straps, but I'm gonna leave one out. I just don't want to overcomplicate anything here. Like, it's not a very important detail. So yeah, I'm gonna leave it out. I'm going to use her hair as reference because I really like her hair. So when you're drawing hair, right? You want to follow the curve of her head. Try to make sure that the hair isn't very evenly divided so that these strands look natural and they look like they have variety. Okay, so I have a line drawing that I'm okay, like I'm pretty happy with it. I added a ponytail because I thought it would be prettier. But you know, more or less it looks like her. I kind of changed the direction of her eyes a little bit. So I think I'm gonna put in a little bit of shading, just some very, very simple shading techniques.
If you learned something new, like and share this with a fellow art nerd. If you love receiving quality and free arts education, subscribe. Here are some other videos you can check out next.